So, so welcome to Awakening to the Climate Crisis, a Buddhist Perspective. And the purpose of my presentation is to look at our climate crisis from the perspective of someone who's very concerned about it, me, and from my perspective as a Buddhist. So in doing that, I'm going to talk about the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and as well as other Buddhist teachings. So I will talk about the scientific facts of climate change, what Canada is doing about it currently, and what we do, both personally and politically, to address it. As an engaged Buddhist, I believe we have the moral obligation to do what we can to address the suffering that is being caused by the climate crisis right now. And I hope my talk will motivate you to take action to address this greatest existential crisis of our time. So just an outline. I'm going to do a land acknowledgement, talk about some housekeeping, then my presentation, and then we'll have the Q&A portion, and we'll close out. So I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. And this is the land acknowledgement for Toronto, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on as a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Housekeeping, I probably don't have to remind people about that, but respect each other and listen with an open mind. Stay mute throughout the portion of the presentation, and if you have a question, put it in the chat, as I've mentioned previously. Closed captioning, you should be able to click on, I think you have to enable that actually. Is it on right now, Denise? Nope. Okay, so let me go back and do that. Okay, so it should be there now if you want to see it. So this is your personal choice. If you want to be able to see see my words as I'm speaking, then you just have to click on the More button, at least on mine, or if you see something that says live transcript, and then you have a choice, or sorry, show subtitle. That's what you should be looking for. That's if you want to do that. Everyone okay with that? Okay. So let me go back to my...
Ray, I don't know if it's just me. I can't see your presentation anymore. It might be just me.
No, it's everybody, because I had to come out. Okay. Okay, so the next one is, let's see. I went through that one already, number 6. Yeah, so if you have any issues, just, actually we didn't do the tech in front of Denise's name, but just text Denise if there's any problems that you're having. I already talked about the sharing links, and I can make a copy of the slides available, so those of you that are interested, just let me know. And we already talked about the Q&A, so I think that's it for that. And, right. So this is just a slide to talk a little bit about myself. And so I think most of you know I'm Japanese Canadian. I'm Sansei, 3rd generation. My parents were born in Canada. My grandparents are from Japan. I was working for the NTR government previously. I worked there for 28 years in information technology. I'm married. I have 2 daughters, Samantha and Camille. Samantha lives in Chicago. She just moved there from Germany. Camille is in Markham. She's married and has 2 kids. And this is the little guy in the yellow shirt is Gibson, and he just turned 9. And the girl is Scarlett, and she just turned 6, March 31st, actually. So I retired in 2011. In that same year, I was ordained into the Order of Interbeing, which is under Thich Nhat Hanh. Actually, he was there for the ceremony. And I've also been a member of the Hamilton Buddhist Temple. I was actually president for about 5 years, and I was on the board of the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist Temples of Canada. So when the IPCC report came out in 2018, this is the one, global warming of 1.5 degrees, I became very concerned about the environment and climate change. And I just, just thought about what kind of world am I leaving to my grandkids and all grandkids. So, so I decided to dedicate my retirement to dealing with the climate crisis. I started doing research. There was so much information, so many reports, so many websites. Um, so I tried to organize all of that, and I put it into a website called myclimatechange.home.blog, and I think Denise has probably put that in the chat. But it contains any organization that I come across that's dealing with climate change, any report I come across, any website I come across, it's in this website. So if you want to take a look at that, please do. I volunteered with several climate change organizations, Toronto Green Community, which was a neighborhood group, 350.org, which was, it's actually an international group, and they were actually tracking fossil fuel divestments around the world, and I was helping to do that. I've also worked with Citizens Climate Lobby, which was behind the carbon tax that was finally introduced by the federal government. That was their big success. And I've also worked with Toronto 350, which is the 350.org local group. Currently, I work with Climate Fast, and I've been with them for about 3 years now. Prior to the pandemic, we were actually helping with the logistics for Fridays for Future Toronto. So this is the group that was started by Greta Thunberg, and but since the pandemic, everything's moved online. So including their work and ours. So we've been basically having workshops, webcasts, presentations, that type of thing online. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the Buddhist portion, and that's the Four Noble Truths. And here are the Four Noble Truths. And the truth is that we are in a climate crisis. People all around the world are suffering from drought, heat waves, wildfires, hurricanes, food and water insecurity, tropical storms, mudslides. Right now we are on track for a 1.8 degree temperature increase. And that's only if all the promises that were made at the last COP26 climate conference are met, which is a bit of a stretch because some of the promises are very, like they're very far reaching, like anyway, so right now they're talking about 1.8, but what we're experiencing currently is because of a 1.2 degree increase. So, and in the last COP, we talked about trying to limit the temperature increase to 1.5. So even 1.8 it's a lot, because right now you're seeing what can happen from a 1.2 degree increase. And here's what happened in Canada just last year. We had the heat dome. We had the, what happened here? Okay. We had the fire in Lytton, BC. We had the flooding in Abbotsford and throughout southern BC. And this was just a picture of the amount of shellfish that died because of the heat dome in British Columbia. So the climate crisis is already here. Just noticing that this is a little bit off here. Just fix that up a little bit. Okay. So CBC reported that 595 people were killed by heat in British Columbia this past summer. And on June 29th alone, 231 people died from extreme heat. So it's pretty serious. This next slide, problem here with my slides. Okay. This slide shows the temperature increase. Temperature increase, the CO2 level. And you'll notice the different events that have taken place. But regardless, we've had 33 climate conferences, like 33 COPs. We've had half a dozen major international agreements, and yet the CO2 is increasing, and along with that, the temperature. You'll notice the fluctuation. So in the wintertime, when there is no vegetation in the northern hemisphere, that's when your CO2 levels go up. But in the summertime, when you have vegetation and the vegetation absorbs more of the CO2, that's when your your CO2 goes down. So you see this kind of a zigzag that takes place. But right now we're currently, and this was July 2021, up to 415 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's what that is about. And you can go to the co2.earth website, which I think Denise has copied over, and that gives you the daily CO2 and temperature, which is measured from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. So next I'm going to go to, let's see, slide 11. So some more truths. Canada was the only one of the G7 countries whose greenhouse gas emissions went up, and that's been by 21% since 1990. And even with, I don't even mean this is here, okay. We even did worse than the United States, and this was while Donald Trump was the president. So the other thing to mention here is that Climate Tracker, it's an independent NGO that rates all countries with regard to their climate policies. And Canada's rating is highly insufficient with regard to their policies and their actions. And it actually hasn't changed even though they've issued their emissions reduction plan. So next. This was some of the messages from the religious leaders and from the United Nations with regard to this latest IPCC report. And the next one, this was also some of the headlines, and it's interesting because in the European newspapers, and you'll see a number of them here, it was front page news. And in Canada, I think there was one column, maybe a 2-column piece in the Toronto Star. I think it was buried in the Globe and Mail, if I remember correctly. But everywhere else, at least in Europe, the IPCC report was taken very seriously. Sorry, I don't know what that's showing up here. Okay. And the Lancet, which is the medical journal, now I'm getting my words showing up at the bottom. The Lancet, which is a medical journal, also talked about how it's code red for a healthy future. Let me keep going. So, continuing with the Four Noble Truths, that brings us to the truth of the cause of our climate crisis. And the cause, the 3 poisons. Ignorance, actually, I should be asking the group about that. So ignorance, attachment, and aversion, right? So ignorance is that we're not aware of how dire our situation is right now. We continue to burn fossil fuels, produce methane. We continue to harm nature. There's still deforestation taking place in the Amazon rainforest. Our oceans are heating up, which is why we're seeing bleaching of the coral reefs, particularly in Australia. And as it turns out, the people that are least responsible, the people that are producing the least of the greenhouse gases are the people that are bearing the brunt. And we're talking about the developing countries, we're talking about some of the island nations. Places like South Africa right now are suffering, Ethiopia. Go to the next slide. So I mentioned attachment. We overconsume. We don't want to change the way we live. Aversion, some of us are just ignoring the climate crisis because we're perhaps not aware of it, or we don't want to think about it, or we feel that we can't do anything about it. So we may feel helpless, we have given up. And that brings us to the truth at the end, about the end of our climate crisis. So we actually know what needs to be done, and that we can reduce the most serious impacts of the climate crisis, but we need to have everyone actively doing something about it, including our elected representatives. So this is the wheel of the Dharma. So this brings me to the path that leads to the end of our climate crisis. And I'm going to start with the right mindfulness spoke of the wheel. And go there to the next slide. So, as I said, we know what to do. The International Energy Agency has laid out a pathway to net zero for actually every country in the world. That's the link. I think Denise is putting it in the chat, but this just shows you at a very high level what needs to happen. There's also a Drawdown, which is a book written by Paul Hawken, and it also shows you some of the things that actually, it's 100 things that we can do to actually reverse global warming. So, and there are other various think tanks and environmental organizations that have come up with different action plans for governments to follow. It's just that we're not following them. And this was actually the report that was just issued last month by the IPCC, and it also outlines the things that can be done to address climate change. The full report is 2,913 pages. I think I just asked Denise to put the link for the summary for policymakers, which is only 64 pages. So it's something that you can look at if you have the time. And let me go to the next slide. So, in my opinion, the mainstream media coverage is part of the problem. Perhaps not so much radio, not so much the websites. Because if you look at some of the CBC, CTV websites, they talk about climate change, but mainstream TV, very little. And they don't really, if they talk about South Africa or Ethiopia, they don't talk about the connection. They don't talk about the fact that it's because we're burning fossil fuels. We subsidize the fossil fuel companies. There's been the latest subsidy in terms of carbon capture, which has been being funded by the federal government. We also extract it. Now we talk about reducing the emissions from extraction, like in the tar sands. But the thing is that the oil that's still being produced is still getting burned. And that's what's contributing to climate change. So I think the thing about the media coverage as well is that the TV stations like CBC, CTV, they're advertising for selling gasoline or selling cars, buying trucks, air travel, travel companies. So to me, there's a conflict of interest there because their sponsors are actually paying for advertising for things that are actually making our world in the climate change situation worse. So that to me is a problem. So there are some independent news media organizations that don't rely on advertising, and these are some of them. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of them. I actually subscribe to The Guardian and Canada's National Observer, but these particular news media websites, they don't pay for advertising, or they don't get paid for advertising. So they can really report on whatever they feel needs to be reported on. The Guardian has been around for a long time reporting on climate change and the climate crisis. There's a couple of websites, the Energy Mix and the Carbon Brief, which are specifically speak to climate change and all the issues and stories around that. So even the BBC, I think, does a better job of reporting on climate change. So you can take a look at those links, and I think Denise would have put them in the chat. And you can also sign up for newsletters. These are just a couple of ones that you can sign up for. So CBC actually does have one, but United Nations, I get a daily newsletter from them as to what's happening. So there is a video that I wanted to show. So I'm going to stop my sharing here and go to a video. And so question, just how is everybody doing? Are people getting the chats? Everyone's okay? Okay, no burning issues you need to resolve right now? Okay, so let me show you this video. And okay. It's going to take me a minute to set it up. because I don't want to show you the whole thing. It's pretty long. Okay, here we go.
Question is, what does the future hold and what do we need to do now? The IPCC makes it very clear that if we follow the current set of global climate mitigation policies, then our kids and grandkids will see an average global surface temperature increase of about 3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That would mean more than 1 million species of animals and plants going extinct on land and in our oceans towards the end of the century, and more than 1 billion human climate refugees attempting to migrate from uninhabitable areas to somewhere they can actually survive, which may well lead to regional and international conflicts as 10 or 11 billion human beings all fight over a rapidly decreasing amount of livable space and an increasingly limited supply of edible food and drinkable water. To give ourselves a greater than 50% chance of avoiding that nightmare and limiting warming to the safe level of just 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, then global greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs, will have to reach their peak no later than 2025, say the IPCC. So that's less than 3 years from now. And the International Energy Agency just told us that global CO2 emissions went up by another 6% in 2021 as we all bounced back from COVID. So our trend line's not looking too encouraging right now. By 2030, less than 8 years from now, the world needs to achieve a 48% decrease in carbon dioxide emissions compared to 2019 levels to stay on target for 1.5 degrees of warming. By 2040, we're looking at an 80% decrease in CO2 to stay on the 1.5 degrees pathway, by which time we'll also need to have reduced methane emissions by 44% compared to 2019 levels. Is this looking challenging to you? Because it is to me. The slightly better news, according to the IPCC, is that there's a range of tangible actions we can take to stop the runaway freight train. They set out all these so-called mitigation options in a single chart, focused on what can actually be achieved by or before 2030. As well as the ability to be rapidly implemented this decade, the two other criteria that the IPCC apply are, number one, how big an impact will it have on the problem, and number two, how much will it cost? So
I'm going to stop that there, but just have a think. The speaker, he actually has been producing videos for a long time related to climate change. So if you have a chance, I think the link is in the chat, and take a look at that. They're very, very big numbers that he's talking about, like 40% and 80% reductions. So they're like, it really needs massive change, massive, urgent and drastic action from what we're doing currently. So let me go back to my slide presentation. Okay. So actually, I went going to this slide here. Yeah. So the next spokes I want to talk about are right concentration and right view. We've been talking about right mindfulness. Let me go there. Okay. So practicing right mindfulness and taking in all this information from reputable sources, we can then move to right concentration. If we can focus and concentrate on understanding what is causing the climate crisis, we can arrive at what needs to be done. So after taking all this in, what do I understand with regard to our climate crisis? What is our right view? So first of all, we are in a climate crisis that is affecting the entire world, and it's going to get worse. Canada currently is not doing enough. Canada is treating the COVID-19 pandemic like an emergency. Like we saw all of this special funding, the buying the vaccinations, doing the rollout, all of that. So they really demonstrated that they can deal with an emergency when they believe there is an emergency. But when it comes to the climate crisis, we need urgent and drastic action, and we need it right now. So let me go to the next slide. So right thinking. So right thinking is understanding that we need to stop burning fossil fuels, we need to stop drilling and mining, we need to start investing in renewable energy. We need to electrify everything, including our transportation, our buses, subways, cars, trucks, trains. our heating. So probably like you, I have natural gas heating, right? So our steel and cement production, which uses a lot of fossil fuels. We need to practice sustainable agriculture, and we need to lessen food waste. Apparently, there's about 40 to 40% of our food is just wasted. We let it go bad or we throw it out. So we need to stop deforestation, stop destroying ecosystems, and we need to help those that are victims of injustice, because as it turns out, when you're mining or you're drilling for oil, you're pushing people off their land, whether it's South America, whether it's North America. And it's because of that injustice that companies are able to do what they're doing. So things like the Coastal GasLink, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, they're all being resisted by indigenous peoples, by First Nations people. But they're, in fact, to me, they've been the protectors. They call it the protectors of the land, the defenders of the water. They've been the people that actually have been helping us to preserve what we already have as much as we do have at this point. So that brings me to right speech. And the most important thing you can do to fight climate change, and this comes from Katharine Hayhoe. Katharine Hayhoe is a Canadian scientist who was born in Toronto and is now in the States. And she's probably the most well-known climate change speaker in the United States. And I think she was declared one of the United Nations spokespersons. And I wanted to show you her video. So let me stop this. And I'm going to go to the video. Okay. This is Katharine Hayhoe.
How do I talk about climate change to my brother-in-law, my neighbor, my colleague, my coworker? I hear this question almost every single day. And usually people have given it a try and it hasn't gone so well. It's either ended in an argument or it's been so depressing you just want to go back to bed and pull the covers back over your head. Here's the thing. Climate change is scary. And it absolutely is depressing. I'm a climate scientist, so I know. But to care about climate change, we don't have to be a certain type of person. I'm absolutely convinced that just about every single person has every reason they need to care about climate change already. And their reason might be different than yours or mine. But if we don't think we care about climate change, it's not because we have to change who we are or what we care about. It's simply because we have not connected the dots between what we already care about and how climate change is affecting it. So when we have these conversations starting over something that we share, whether it's a love of cooking or a sport or the place where we live or our child, we connect the dots between climate change and how it's affecting what we already care about, what already matters to us. And then we talk about how we really can fix this thing. And in fact, climate change is not a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of a very steep hill with only a few hands on it. That giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It's already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. It just needs more hands to get it going faster. When we realize that we are not alone, when we realize that the world truly can change, that's when we realize that yes, we truly can make a difference. And how do we knock over that first domino? By having a simple conversation about why climate change matters and what we can all do to help fix it.
So we actually had her speak at one of our Earth Day events. So she's very open to speaking to different groups. I think she's been in Ontario like several times. And it's all virtual, so it really doesn't matter where you are. She can deliver a talk, and she's a very, very inspiring speaker, which I can see why she was selected by United Nations as their spokesperson for climate change. Okay, let me get back to my slides. So how are we doing? Everyone's okay? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, thumbs up. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so we just heard Katharine Hayhoe. But there are a couple of programs. So there's Kitchen Table Climate Conversations, which is a program that was developed by Climate Fast. Actually, I was involved in that. And they have a website, which I think Denise shared with you. There's also another group called Carbon Conversations Toronto. And this is a program that was actually started in England, and they brought it over. But it's actually let's see, I'm trying to remember now because I took it. I think it was a six-week program. And it was an in-person program. This is pre-pandemic, but it's also something you might want to look into. Okay. So let me keep going. Right. So right personal action. So there are things you can do personally to reduce your carbon footprint. These are some of the links and websites that you can go to that'll talk about what you can do on the personal level. Okay. There's another video by Just Have a Think, the gentleman that we just heard, and you can look at that video when you have a chance. What we eat and what we buy matters. Okay. We need to buy less. Buy what you need, not what you want. So if we all make changes, we can make a difference. So this is called the Dirty Dozen, and this is from 2021. I think there has been a new report issued, but I haven't updated that part of it. But what you'll see, though, is that there are three Canadian banks that are in the top 12. And that doesn't mean that TD and Scotiabank are off the hook. TD invested 121 billion. Scotiabank is 114 billion. It's Bank of Montreal. Yeah, Bank of Montreal, 97 billion is not on this chart, and CIBC is 67 billion. So as it turns out, the big five banks are all big investors in fossil fuels, and a lot of the money is in the tar sands. So there is a program, and it's on the next slide. Yeah, it's a program called Bank Switch. This is set up by the Climate Pledge Collective. Myrtle, I can't remember her husband's name, but what they're promoting is switching your bank, switching to a bank, like perhaps to a credit union or a cooperative, and getting it away from the big five banks, which are investing in fossil fuels. So it's something to look at if you're interested. I think Mary Huang was actually looking into that. Also, your pension plan. So CPPIB, Canadian Pension Plan, and the major pension plans, if you're a hospital worker, a teacher, a municipal worker, a provincial worker, if you go to the Shift website, it'll actually help you in sending a message to the people that are looking after these pension funds and asking them to divest from fossil fuels. So you can take a look at that. Right social action. Volunteer. Like rather than getting depressed reading the news or looking at these reports, do something about it, right? Join an organization. There's some national ones that you can look at. I've mentioned a couple of these already. I belong to Climate Fast, but there are so many, whether it's nature related, environmental related, injustice, social injustice, indigenous injustice. Everything is interlinked. So these are all things that you can look into. Okay, so even if everybody in the city or everybody in the country did these things in terms of personal action, everything helps. Every little bit helps, but it's going to require political action in order for us to make the big and drastic changes that we need. Things like converting all of our TTC buses to electric buses. Things like replacing our natural gas heating in our houses with electric heat pumps, right? So we need big changes. If you think about what Canada's promised, they promised a 40% reduction by 2030. That's part of their emissions reduction plan, which they issued last month. What does that mean? It means 40% of our cars and buses, trucks and trains need to be converted to electric vehicles. It means 40% of all of our buildings, whether it's the store, your house, your school, have to be converted. 40% of those have to be converted by 2030. So unless we start moving on that track, it's not going to happen, right? So, and of course, this assumes that all of our electricity is not generated from fossil fuels, but both Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and Nunavut are still producing electricity from coal or burning natural gas. So these are all things to be aware of, and lobbying our politicians to change things. Next slide. Oh, I just ran. Oh, I'm not still there. Okay. So what do we want to tell our elected representatives to do? So there is a campaign that I'm currently involved with called the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, and it's focused on the provincial election. June 2nd is when we elect a new Ontario government. And these are some of the things that we've set out in this campaign. So, you can read it for yourself, but basically setting binding climate targets, and this was actually the second thing, was to prioritize and respect Indigenous sovereignty and autonomy. Investing in zero emissions economy, investing in wind turbines, investing in solar panels, investing in whether it's geothermal or tidal energy sources. Next one, ending fossil fuel subsidies. So it's like there's billions of dollars that are spent by the federal government and provincial governments on subsidizing fossil fuel companies right now. They're still doing that, right? Prioritizing public health. I talked about transitioning our gas heating in our buildings, our transportation, protecting natural biodiversity, okay, and actually doing what they call regenerative agriculture, not this where you always till the land, you fertilize it, and then you grow. And what it does is actually you're providing artificial nutrients as opposed to just leaving the land as it is and allowing the land to actually look after itself. So that's what part of what regenerative agriculture is about. And the last part of this was a public education campaign, so people are more aware that how dire our situation is currently. Having an office of the environmental commissioner. One of the things that Doug Ford did when he came in is he shut down that position. So, and it was meant to be an arm's length commissioner that looked at what the government was doing in terms of climate change. And the last point was just leave no one behind. So that's any and all disadvantaged groups, to make sure that they're looked after as we make this transition. So my last video is this one, and I'm gonna exit out of here. I can find out how to do that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so my last video. And this is produced by the United Nations.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, Paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
So I love that video. There's a website for it as well. And what's interesting about the website, it talks about all the different excuses that people come up with, and it gives a response to that. Right now, the federal government is providing $3.3 billion to fossil fuel companies right now, annually. And that's reported by the Environmental Defense NGO. So, okay, so let me come back to my slides. Okay, so that was that one. Okay. So one of the things you can do is you can lobby for a climate emergency declaration. There's a website for that. And currently there's 2,094 jurisdictions, I just updated it, that have declared a climate emergency. And these are the ones that have taken place in Canada. So Canada declared a national climate emergency on June 17th, but then the next day they actually purchased the TMX pipeline. So it's kind of a one step forward and two steps back. But you can just see here what various jurisdictions have done. There's also the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this treaty involves these three things. And as it turns out, we have 4 jurisdictions in Canada that have actually endorsed it. And Toronto endorsed it on July 15th, 2021. Actually, Climate Fabs was a big player in lobbying the different city councillors to do that. So that was one of our big successes last year. And so right political action, talk or write to your city councillor, your MPP, your MP. You can do a deputation. In fact, Climate Fast has actually done workshops on how to do deputations to your city council. You can write a letter to the editor. And actually, this is a letter to the editor that was published, let's see, the 13th, which was published last week. Actually, this is one I wrote, and it got into the Toronto Star. So I think, if I remember correctly, I think Denise has got a link for that. But so it can happen. It's actually the second one that I've had published by the Toronto Star. So, and this was in relation to the Bay du Nord project, which was just approved in Newfoundland by the federal government. So, anyways, just keep moving along here. There are petitions or action letters that you can sign, and these are just a couple of the organizations that produce those. Lead Now is one of the big ones, but Avaz is international, and Care to Petitions is a newer one. You can also create your own petitions. So those are things that you can do. And so there are 2 provincial elections taking place this year. Ontario's, as I mentioned earlier, is June 2nd. Quebec is October 3rd. There are 4 campaigns that you could get involved with. The Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign is the one I'm currently working on. Not one seat. It actually was mentioned in the Toronto Star today, the main section, I think. Tim Ellis, who looks after Lead Now, is actually campaigning to make sure that there are no Toronto seats that become conservative for this election. So that's his objective. So if you're in a Toronto riding that has a conservative MPP, that's what he's trying to overturn. And in doing that, I believe there's 11 conservative seats in Toronto. He believes that by overturning those 11 seats, he can prevent a a progressive conservative majority, and therefore, if the Liberals and the New Democrats and the Green Party get together, they can actually form the government. So that's what his campaign is about. There's also the Ontario Voters Coalition. I can't actually remember the details of that one. I think it involves actually knocking on doors and posting flyers. Greenpac's been around for a long time, and they actually endorse candidates which declare themselves as climate champions, regardless of political party affiliation. And they also arrange debates. I've actually organized some debates for them, where we will have, in a particular riding, we'll have the incumbent plus the candidates actually debate about climate change. So that's to make it more aware, the public more aware of what their positions are, and therefore are able to vote accordingly. So, and I believe there's about 3 or 4 that Climate Fast is involved with. I'm not involved with them directly right now, but that's another one that you can join. So I think all those links are in the chat. So if you're interested, or you can always talk to me about it as well. Right livelihood, I just put this in here because that's one of the spokes in the Dharma wheel. But if you're doing something that's contributing to the climate crisis or contributing to the suffering of others, you might want to look for alternative work, and I'll just leave it at that. I would mention the Iron and Earth organization, which are actually oil patch workers who are looking to transition to working on renewable energy projects. So they've actually been for several years. We had their I guess founder speak at Climate Fast a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic. So, and that brings me to, where am I right now? Oh, yeah, right, diligence. So if you can, and if you have the time, start or continue to do those things, like both personally and perhaps politically, to help address our climate crisis. There's a lot of, they call it doomism or doomerism right now. Like, there are a lot of people that are kind of giving up because they just see this hopeless. But it doesn't matter what action you take, everything helps. Like, whether it's done at the personal level or done at the political level, everything helps, because anything we can do is going to decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore decrease the average global temperature in the world, and therefore make it better for more people. So just remember, I mentioned impermanence. The second eye of Buddhism, after interconnectedness, is that we can always change a situation. There is a theory, and this was produced by Erica Chenoweth, and the 3.5% rule. If you can get 3.5% of a population actively involved in a particular change, then you can make it happen. 3.5% seems like a very small number, but if you can get 3.5% of the people, say in Toronto or in your riding, involved in something, then they can make it happen. So you can read the article that link takes you to. So what is a Buddhist? So be wise, stay informed, keep learning, watch out for false solutions. I believe that carbon capture and small nuclear reactors, what they call small modular reactors, are false solutions. They can't be scaled, they can't be developed, they can't be tested in time for when we actually need it to happen. The other part of being a Buddhist is being compassionate. So practice engaged in Buddhism means getting involved. Like, get involved, talk with people, talk with your friends, talk with your family, right? Get involved politically if you can, okay? But practice, wisdom, compassion, loving kindness in your climate conversations and your advocacy. And use your time and energy where you think it'll have the greatest impact. We all have different skills and different talents, and you can kind of figure out for yourself, where can I help the most? And then just do it. So I'll close with this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, that we have the power to decide the destiny of our planet. And then finally, that's my email ID. There's Climate Fast website and my website that I talked about earlier. So if you want to talk to me about what you can do or how you can get involved, or you have questions about it, certainly just email me. We can arrange to meet with you or respond to your email. And so these are some of the appendices, and I wasn't going to get into that right now. So I think that's it.